Hey guys, so I'm glad to see you here because it means that you've actually purchased my feathers video, and that is super exciting, and I wanted to say thank you. I also want to be one of those artists that can show you my face as well as my hands because I don't want to hide behind the camera. So I just wanted to give you a personal thanks. I really appreciate it, and I'm super excited, and I really hope you enjoy the video. I also wanted to tell you that I did a little bit of research on the feather, which, by the way, feathers are really cool, and we're going to study them next year in school because I homeschool. So okay, so shaft. Right here is the shaft. Right here is the after feathers, and then you have the downy feathers right here. So these right here are called veins. So I'm telling you this for a reason. First off, because it's really great to learn, and so I'm teaching myself, and so I figured I'd share. Maybe half of you already know this, and I'm just late to the game as usual. But why I'm telling you this is because this is what I'm going to call it in the video, so you understand what I'm talking about. So the shaft, the veins, the downy feathers are these little tiny ones down here. This one doesn't really have a lot of downy feathers, but then you've got the after feather as well. And those are always the ones that I kind of connect to the feather, and then there's the downy feathers as well. And then there's this bottom part, and I bet you can't guess what it's called. I'm gonna give you a guess. Go ahead, just guess. It's called the quill. That's what this part's called, is the quill. So that's a cool little hollow part that we draw. Anyways, again, thank you so much. I really appreciate your friendship and getting to know you and getting to see your feathers. I really do enjoy it, and I'm looking forward to the colored feathers class. Anyways, enjoy the video. Thanks. I wanted to share with you what mediums I used for this video. So I have the Tombow dual-tipped markers, 620, 603, and 606. I have Polychromos, Faber-Castell, colored pencils. I've got the white, the ultramarine, the light ultramarine, and the Delft blue. I've got the light cold gray and the dark cold gray. And I've got the black. And I have a gel pen, 08, which is a jelly roll. I also have the Faber-Castell Pitt Artist Pen, 101. And a clear alcohol ink blending pen. This last pencil I'm showing you is a wax-based pencil, and I like using it because it leaves a really smooth, buttery finish. It's Prismacolor. Then last but not least, I have my refillable water brushes that you can fill up with water. So to start off with this feather, what I'm doing is creating the shaft. I'm allowing the white space to show through. I want it to be the widest part of the feather. I'm using the bullet-tipped side of the marker so that my lines are more defined and stand out to me. This part of your feather is a guide. So I'm using the technique from the last feather we did and creating an outline. Your string, if you want to call it that. Once I'm satisfied with my outline, what I'm going to do is I'm going to fill it in with the brush-tipped side of my pen. The brush-tipped side of the marker allows for different strokes because it's a flexible nib, you can make wider strokes and thinner strokes depending on the pressure that you put on the marker. I would definitely suggest practicing with this marker or any brush tipped marker so that you can get a feel for how the tip feels and the different thickness the strokes can be with your specific brand. Feathers are all about balance. So what I'm doing here is I'm using those guides that I first drew out and I'm filling them in, but I'm also looking at the feather and I'm balancing it out. And as long as it's balanced out in your mind, you'll be happy with it. But it's the same simple strokes that we were creating from the first feather. Most of my strokes are soft C's as I go along with the brush tipped, but some of them are soft S's as well. So instead of drawing each individual vein like we did with the micron pen, because of the width of the brush tip, each stroke is our vein without having to go back and forth. The next pen that I'm using is the lightest pen, and it's 620. Again, I'm using the brush end of the pen and filling in some of those areas. What the lighter color does with the darker color is it allows for blending of that darker color. While also creating depth within the feather. One thing that I do remember, or try to remember while I'm creating these, is that we do want to have depth within our feather. Everything that we darken up looks far away. Everything that we keep light looks closer. We're tricking the eye with our depth. So blending darker and lighter colors is really just tricking the eye into seeing the darker and the lighter as further away and closer up. Now what I'm doing is using the darkest of the purples, which is 606, and I'm lining that centerpiece, the shaft of the feather. Again, going off of the first video, I'm still using those shading techniques within this feather. So, choosing a side that I want to look darker is what I'm doing. Just kind of placing this darkest of markers in areas that I know I'll want those feathers to look deeper or further away, kind of strategically placing them on the lighter side, close to the white. Again, my downy feathers are always a little bit darker. This is a preference of mine, so I'm taking the darkest of purples that I have and I'm darkening up those downy feathers. If you don't like yours as dark as I like mine, you don't have to darken them up quite so much. I like my after feathers to look like they're underneath as well. And that's the little pieces that I'm coloring right now. Really just going through and just creating a few strokes with this darkest of pens. I don't want it to overwhelm my feather, but I do want it in there for depth. Now what I'm doing is I'm taking a pre-filled water brush and I'm brushing out those marker strokes. That ink that we've laid down moves so nicely with water. Going in the same direction that each one of your strokes went as you laid it down is important when doing this step. You want to flow with the ink that's already laid down. This ink will move so beautifully when you move from the center to the outside of each vein that you created. Those bottom downy feathers, there's a lot of ink down there. So you can let them dry just a little bit and then move that ink around a little bit more. You can pull that ink, like I'm doing right now, into the bottom portion, the quill of the feather, and then pull it out some more, just for texture. Pulling that ink out and allowing it to dry, and then pulling it out some more gives the ink kind of a softer look. Again, I'm leaving some pieces of my feather out. The white pieces, I've strategically placed those on the lighter side of my feather so that it has depth. Using the excess ink I still have left on my brush, I fill in the quill area of the feather, really trying to maintain that centerpiece and keep it white. The whitest white you'll get is the white you leave left out. The main thing about using the water with the markers is just remembering to move from the center to the outside of each vein. What I did with these downy feathers at the bottom was I allowed them to dry just a little bit. I put a little extra water on my brush and moved some of that ink out just a little bit more to create texture. Moving into the colored pencils, what I'm doing is I'm using the white and I'm laying down a base coat. Colored pencils are best used when built up in layers. So that's what I'm doing, is layering with the first layer. Using white as my first layer really softens up the center of that feather. and reestablishing my white pieces that I didn't color. As I layer my colored pencils, I am going so gently with the first layers. I am basically just tickling the paper. As we build up our layers with colored pencil, it's very important to remember to go lightly. This takes patience and it takes practice. I'm starting with the second darkest blue that I'm using. I switch between this color and the lighter color blue quite a bit. This is the Ultramarine 9201-120-120. In using this color, what I'm doing is I'm reestablishing the darker color purple that I did, and I'm again creating depth. So very lightly laying down some more layers on top of that white that I just put down. I'm going through and looking for the darker lines that I already put down with my marker tip. So again, we're layering. Colored pencils are all about layering, and that's really what I'm doing is I'm starting to build up those layers. Just by redefining some of those darker spots that I laid down earlier, and just softly going through, gently tickling the paper. When I'm coloring these feathers with my colored pencils, I'll go up and down the shaft area like this with the colored pencil, but this is the only time that you'll see me going in that direction with the colored pencil. The rest of my strokes are like this. They're kind of feathered out where I might push a little harder towards the shaft and then I pull it out to the outside of the feather. Just following along with the darker parts of the feather that are already there, and then also creating more depth in each stroke that I've already made by darkening up the bottom of the vein. So going through some of those pieces that I pulled out at the end with the water brush, as you can see, it makes them stand out just a little bit more. This is also my way of creating sort of folds in the feather. We all know that feathers don't fold, but when we have a darker area, it makes it look like the feather is sort of folded. The veins will, the veins in a real feather will go one underneath another, right? So basically by darkening up certain areas, whether it be underneath a lighter piece or making individual veins stick out a little bit more, those are going to create the sort of folds that I'm talking about. This part of the feather is my underneath. So the way that I envisioned this part of the feather that I'm coloring on right now is I envisioned it being sort of like it was flipped over and the underneath side of that flip. That's how I envisioned it in my head. So I really tried to darken that up as I went along, but I didn't want to darken it up too much. So I really played it safe and just went very slowly with that little underside of the feather. And that's okay. You can go slowly. If you're not sure, don't do it. And then if you're not sure and you want to do it, then do it. Remember, all our feathers are practice. You can't mess these up. There's no mess ups at all. Every single one of my feathers that I make is practice. Again, I'm making those strokes right there next to the centerpiece of my feather, going up and down like that, but then I'm coming back out and really making sure to blend those strokes, because what happens is if you are coloring with colored pencil and you go in the opposite direction of the rest of your pencil strokes, you'll be able to see it when you're finished. Even if you blend with a white pencil and try to burnish it out, you'll still be able to see it. I'm now moving to the lighter color, the light ultramarine. It's 9201-140. What I'm doing with this is redefining those lines that I just went over. So when you take a darker pencil and then a lighter pencil over it, it softens up the lines that you just made. Again, just really, really with a soft touch, going through and laying down another layer. Layer upon layer is how this feather was created. Redefining those lines, softening up some lines that I already made, but the reason for it is just to layer and layer and layer. I feel like I'm saying layer a lot, but that's the crucial part of it, is layering each color so that you have a very soft, almost painted look at the end. So just coming up underneath the darker blue that we already laid down, creating some other areas that you want to be a little bit lighter, and layering, more layering. Now I've moved to the darkest blue that I'm using, which is called Delft Blue 9201-141. With this color, I'm really defining those areas that I want to be darker. Just going back through and making those pieces of the feather really stand out. Giving each vein definition. I still want it to have different tones, so some lighter, some darker, but there are pieces of the feather that I already defined as bits that I wanted to be darker. In the beginning, when I placed down the darkest of purples, when I was doing the marker. So here I'm just really just defining those areas that I want to be darker and I want to stick out. And in the end, it'll look kind of like the undersides of each vein are those darker pieces. And throughout the feather like this, just creating, again, those folds I was talking about, where the feathers lay over one another. And it's also for, I'm taking some artist license here and just making it pretty. Because making it pretty is really what it boils down to. We want it to be aesthetically pleasing. The next color I'm going to use is a Cold Gray 2 is what it's called. The Cold Gray allows me to blend my colors while keeping their crispness. So we've got that dark blue in there that we just used right before this, and we want that to remain crisp. If we used a white to blend all our colors in, it would lose some of that vibrancy. So using a light gray really allows us to maintain those darker colors. After the gray, we'll use white to highlight areas that are already highlighted and to lighten up areas that we want to get lighter. But blending the colors with this lighter gray really allows us to get in there and blend colors that we wouldn't be able to do. We wouldn't be able to keep the colors as vibrant if we used the white to blend the entire feather. So moving to the white, we're going to lighten up the areas that are already light. So that we can maintain that brightness, and while also blending some of the lighter colors. Again, I'm going in very gentle layers, so I'm still using the same pressure as I did in the beginning. Just laying down layer after layer after layer. So that is the sequence of pencils that I use And you might have noticed that the feather looks like it's more blended or got more layers on it than it did when I first laid down the dark color before I started the gray. And that's because I had laid down several layers between the dark and the light. I wanted you to get the idea of how I laid down the colored pencils and the series in which I did so, but I did that probably about 5 times in the same sequence, from the darker blue to the lighter blue to the dark blue and then the gray and then the white. And I did that 4 or 5 times, really getting those layers of colored pencil in there. So if I were to have recorded or kept those in my recording, it was an 80-minute video, so I had to cut out some of it. But it's the same thing. You're just gonna layer after layer after layer. And again, here I'm using the dark pencil to redefine the dark pieces that were already there and really get them to stand out. And as you build your layers of colored pencil, this dark blue really makes it pop. Don't be afraid to add the dark. The dark is really what makes it stand out. It gives it its vibrancy, its life. But you're really just doing the same process over and over and over again. You're layering and layering and layering. And as you go, you'll start seeing how the darker colors really make the pieces look like they're laying underneath each other. Now that I have quite a few layers on here, I'm laying down a little bit more of this dark blue because I know that I'm not going to blend it out. I sped up the video in areas quite a bit so that we wouldn't be here together for 2 hours watching me do the same thing. And turning my paper while I draw, I hope it didn't make you dizzy. And just really using this white pencil, I'm starting to burnish my areas, my lighter areas. And by burnish, what I mean is I am using a little bit of a harder pressure to blend my colors together. But I'm focusing mainly on the lighter areas. I don't want to burnish my darker areas with the white because it will take out that contrast that I've just worked so hard to get. So just focusing in on the areas that are already white and the lighter areas. Now I'm going to come back through with my darker pencil and redefine those lines. This is a more accurate view of the speed that I've been going while creating this feather. I'm really starting to darken up this under area. If you recall me telling you in the beginning that when I was creating this feather, I saw it sort of folding over, and I wanted to define that a little bit more as I went. So now I'm darkening it up so it looks like it's kind of leaning over itself. If you find that placing this many layers over your feather for your first feather stresses you out, you can follow the process that I'm doing and just lay down 2 layers for your first feather, or 3 layers for your first feather. Or if you're sharing this video with your kids, you can show them how to do it with just 1 layer in the same sequence. With the color that we laid down underneath before starting the colored pencils, you'll have a beautiful feather even without the colored pencil. So don't let it stress you out. But I wanted to give you the full effect of how many layers I laid down and how long it takes. So maybe it's a 2 or 3 day process. That's okay. Just relax and breathe and add your colors and have fun with it. That's the whole point. So again, I'm darkening up that area where it kind of folds over. Remember, what you make darker looks farther away. What you keep lighter looks closer. It's all about tricking the eye into believing what it's seeing. So darkening up this spot with that dark blue pencil really does eventually make it look like it's folded over on top of itself. dark blue pencil, I made a soft S at the quill end, which gave it more dimension than creating a curved line on the other side to sort of repeat that dimension. So this next step that I did is completely optional. What I'm using here is a clear alcohol ink based blender. The one I'm using is from Derwent, and it's a little bit of a wider tip. They come in thinner tips. Either one would be fine, but again, completely optional. I went ahead and used it just so you could see what it looked like to blend with a clear blender, but you can get the same exact look by burnishing with a colorless blender or a burnisher, or even just reblending the way that we've been blending back and forth between the darker and the lighter colors. To keep your colors vibrant though, you don't want to use the white on your dark, or even a burnisher might make your dark colors a little bit lighter. You can over blend with one of these markers. As you can see, there's a spot right underneath the bend of my feather that I feel I over blended just a little bit. So if you do choose to use a clear blender, just be careful and use it gently. Basically, all I'm doing is going through over my dark colors and blending them into my lighter colors, or blending the lighter colors into my darker colors, I guess would be a better way of saying it. Now I'm taking my black colored pencil, and it's just black. It's 9201199. And again, I'm redefining the lines that I've already laid down. Really creating drama by adding some black to them. This gave magnificent contrast between the dark and the light. I really liked the effect that it had. It made it very vibrant, and it made the colors pop even more. Since I already have my layers built up inside my feather, I can lay the black colored pencil down in light layers, and it adds that pop of color that I'm looking for without being too much. So it's not overwhelming the feather, but it's adding just enough to kind of give it that extra pizzazz. So what I do is I layer it down, and I step away from it, and I look at it, and then I can layer it some more, and I'll step away and I'll look at it. And not necessarily do I have to step away from the entire feather, but I'll stop and I'll look at it and decide if it needs to be darker. So this is really where you get to use your artist perspective. And believe it or not, you are an artist. You're creating beautiful images. So whether this is your first colored feather or your 50th, you get to be an artist today. And that is the coolest thing about this whole entire process. Really just keeping in mind that you can always add more. Now what I'm doing is I'm using a darker cold gray. It's called Cold Gray 4 9201-233. And what I'm doing is softening up the black colored pencil that I just laid down. Just really blending it in with the rest of the colors to kind of soften the edges. Going through and adding a bit of gray to that center hollow just to give it a little bit of depth. Now what I'm going to do is I am going to highlight the center shaft. This pen is called a Faber-Castell Pitt pen. It's white 101. I love this pen. I can't say enough about this pen, but it is completely optional. If you don't have one of these pens, use a gel pen to do this center part. But what you're doing is you're highlighting the center of that shaft to really make it stand out. And just making it pop. And what I'm doing with the white gel pen now is softening up those lines that I created with the Pitt marker, and bringing it up all the way to the top of the feather. Gel pens are amazing. With gel pens though, what you need to do is they work well in layers. So your first layer may come out a little purple or blue or whatever color you're making your feather, and that's okay. You let it dry for a couple seconds and then you can go over it again, and you can go over it again and again. Gel pens are pretty neat. I use them and treat them like paint a lot of the time, but they go on in layers so that they can have that stark white contrast for the center of the shaft as well. Now what I'm doing is I'm taking the lightest of the purple markers that I used in the beginning, the 620, and I'm just creating depth by giving it a little bit of color to either side of that white center that I did. And if you get this on the gel pen or on the white part in the center at all, like you can see I used my thumb to sort of wipe it off. Another thing that would work is just having a paper towel next to you or diaper wipes. Diaper wipes usually work really well. I have them handy right next to my desk most days. using this marker to just sort of darken up that centerpiece inside the hollow, adding a little bit. It's such a light color that you can use it, and it just creates sort of a shadow wherever you place the little bit of marker. But it's just enough, especially for that little hollow. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add my final step of just sort of blending that marker in just a little bit with the dark gray, kind of getting it to all be one, the whole shaft, shading, white piece, shading on the other side, just sort of making it all into one pretty centerpiece. I'm using my hand to wipe away the colored pencil, and really you could use a paintbrush, like a soft bristled paintbrush or something of the sort, so as not to smear your colored pencil. That'd probably be a good suggestion. So here it is, the final piece. I hope you guys found value in this video, and I'm really excited to see yours.